A frozen German shepherd crawled to a Navy SEAL's porch every night. Then he learned why she wouldn't leave. She was on his porch again. 3 nights in a row now. Same time. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, when the temperature in Dalton, Idaho had dropped to the kind of cold that makes the hinges on a front door contract and pop, and Ethan Cole would hear the scratch at the base of the wood and open the door and find her there, curled against the threshold, ice crystals in the thick fur along her spine, paws raw from the road. Every night she came. Every night she let him bring her inside and feed her and warm her. Every night, by the time the sun came up, she was gone. The 4th night, Ethan did not go back to sleep after she left. He sat in the dark kitchen with his coffee, and he thought about a dog that walks to the same door in the same weather, on the same schedule. And he thought about what that kind of precision means in an animal that has been trained the way this animal had clearly been trained. And he arrived, by the time the coffee was gone, at a conclusion that settled into his chest with the specific weight of something that is true and needs to be acted on. She was not lost. She was asking for something. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story reaches you, please subscribe and stay until the very end. What this dog had been doing in the dark and cold of an Idaho winter for 3 weeks is something that changed everything Ethan Cole thought he understood about loyalty. Stay with us. Ethan Cole was 40 years old and had been in Dalton for 7 months, which was long enough to know which diner opened at 5 and which hardware store stocked the screws he needed, but not long enough to know the roads by feel, the way you know roads you grew up on. He was lean and rangy, 6'1", with the particular economy of movement of a man who has trained his body to be an instrument rather than a statement. No wasted motion, no performed presence. Just the specific physical quiet of someone who has spent years in environments where being noticed could be measured in consequences. His hair was dark and cut short by habit. His face had the kind of angles that weather sharpens over time, and the skin around his eyes carried the fine lines of a man who has squinted into a great deal of bright light in places without shade. His eyes were dark gray, the color of slate after rain, still and direct. The kind of eyes that made people feel, without being able to say why, that lying to this man would be more trouble than it was worth. He had been Chief Petty Officer Ethan Cole, SEAL Team 8, for 15 years. 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq, and 1 that was filed under a designation he was not going to speak about in a town of 4,000 people in Idaho or anywhere else. He had come home from the last one with a separated left shoulder that had healed close enough to write, and a bronze star with a Valor device that he kept in the same drawer as his dental records, because both were important, and neither required display. He had retired in May, purchased 40 acres outside Dalton, because the land was cheap and the mountains were close, and the nearest neighbor was far enough away that he could sit on his porch in the evening and hear nothing made by human beings, which was the specific silence he had been seeking for 3 years without being able to name it until he found it. He had no dog of his own. He had been meaning to get one since April and had not. In the specific way that people who are used to doing hard things sometimes stall on simple ones, because the simple ones require a different kind of decision. Not discipline, just willingness. Shadow had apparently decided not to wait for his willingness. He found her registration the 4th morning. After the 4th night, she had a collar, thin, older, with a tag that had been rubbed nearly smooth by years of wear. He had not been able to read it in the dark of the previous nights, and in the warmth of the kitchen he had not thought to look while he was focused on getting ice out of her paws. This morning, he held the tag under the kitchen light and worked the engraving with his thumbnail until 3 letters came clear. WD. Military Working Dog. and below it, partially legible through the wear, a registration sequence he recognized as the format used by the Department of Defense's Military Working Dog Program. He took a photograph of the tag and sent it to a contact at the Naval Special Warfare Center, who had helped him navigate the adoption paperwork when a teammate of his had tried to adopt his working dog 2 years ago. The contact called back in 40 minutes. Shadow's full registration, a 6-year-old German Shepherd female, certified in human remains detection and narcotics, deployed twice to Afghanistan under the 75th Ranger Regiment, honorably retired in 2021 following a ligament repair in her right rear leg that had been deemed incompatible with continued deployment. Adopted by her original handler on discharge. Her handler's name was in the record, Joseph Allen Ferris. Age 67. Address in Dalton, Idaho. Ethan put the phone down. He looked at the dog across the kitchen. Shadow was watching him from her spot beside the heating vent, chin on her front paws, amber eyes steady and attentive. Her right rear leg had the slight telltale thickness of a joint that has been repaired and has healed well but carries the history of the repair in its architecture. Joe Ferris, Ethan said. Shadow's ears came forward. You know that name, Ethan said. Her tail moved once. Not the slow, certain peace signal of a dog whose story is over. Something more urgent, more directed. The tail movement of an animal that has been trying to communicate something for 3 weeks and is watching the human across from it finally start to understand. He knew the name. That was the thing. Not Joe Ferris specifically. He had met Joe Ferris once, briefly, at a transition assistance event at Mountain Home Air Force Base in 2019, a gathering of veterans at various stages of transition. The kind of event Ethan had attended because his commanding officer had suggested it, and because he had been, at the time, beginning to understand that the end of his service was not as far away as he had been telling himself. Joe Ferris had been there as a volunteer, a Vietnam-era Special Operations veteran. A quiet man in his mid-60s with the bearing that never fully leaves, and a Ranger tab on his civilian jacket that he wore without ceremony. They had spoken for perhaps 20 minutes. Ethan remembered him as the kind of man who listened more than he talked and asked questions that showed he had been listening, and as someone who moved through the room with the careful, slightly effortful pace of a man managing old injuries without complaint. He had not known, at that event, that Joe Ferris lived in Dalton. He had not known until this morning. He looked up the Dalton address associated with the registration. He drove there that afternoon. The house on Millbrook Road was a small ranch property, tidy in the way of houses maintained by someone who cared and could not fully keep up. The porch needed paint. One of the shutters was angled wrong, but the walk had been shoveled recently, and the mailbox was upright. A car was in the driveway. Ethan knocked. The man who answered was not Joe Ferris. He was 38 years old, thick through the middle, with a specific defensive posture of someone who opens their door expecting a problem. His name, Ethan would learn later, was Derek Ferris, Joe's son. "I'm looking for Joe Ferris," Ethan said. "I believe his dog has been coming to my property." Something moved across Derek Ferris's face. Not surprise. Something that started as calculation and settled into the specific expression of a person deciding how much of a situation to reveal. "My father doesn't live here anymore," Derek said. "He's in a care facility. His health declined." A pause, timed the way pauses are timed when they are designed to close a conversation. "The dog ran off months ago. I've been looking for her." He said this last sentence without looking at the dog that was standing at Ethan's left knee. Shadow had come with him. She stood at his left side in the precise heel position of a trained military working dog. Her body still, her amber eyes fixed on Derek Ferris with the specific unmoving attention that the framework called low growl without barking. Someone in the scene is bad. She did not make a sound. She simply looked at him with the full, unblinking certainty of an animal that knows exactly what it is looking at and has no uncertainty about it whatsoever. Derek looked at the dog once, then away. Quickly. "Which facility?" Ethan said. "Pineview," Derek said, "out on Route 12. But visiting hours, he was already closing the door. They're limited. He needs his rest." The door closed. Ethan stood on the porch for a moment. Shadow pressed against his left leg, not the trained contact of a dog maintaining position, but the specific lateral pressure of an animal communicating something. He looked down at her. She was still watching the closed door. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." He drove to Pineview Care Center the following morning and was told, by a receptionist who had the specific apologetic posture of a person delivering a policy they did not set, that Joseph Ferris was a resident of the memory care wing, that visits were restricted to immediate family, and that his son had requested no unscheduled contact. "Has he had any visitors?" Ethan said. The receptionist hesitated. The hesitation was brief. But it was the specific hesitation of someone for whom the honest answer and the policy answer are not the same answer. "I can pass along a message," she said. He left his name and number written on a card. He drove home. He sat at the kitchen table, and he thought about a man in a memory care facility who had no visitors and whose dog walked 2 miles through Idaho winter every night to scratch at the door of the only other person she had apparently been able to find, and he thought about the specific way Derek Ferris had not looked at the dog, which was the way people do not look at things they are afraid will reveal something about them. He called his contact at the Naval Special Warfare Center. "I need to know about a veteran," he said. "Vietnam era. Special operations. Name's Joe Ferris." The contact called back in 2 hours. "Joseph Allen Ferris, 2 tours Vietnam. Special Forces, highly decorated, honorably discharged. Full veterans benefits including a pension that, at his grade and time in service, came to approximately $3,400 per month. Widowed, 2018. 1 child, Derek, listed as next of kin and financial power of attorney as of 2022. Financial power of attorney. Ethan sat with that for a long moment. Then, he called a friend, a woman named Patricia, who had done JAG before going into Veterans Legal Services, and who he had met at the same mountain home transition event where he had met Joe Ferris, and who had given him her card with the specific sincerity of someone who meant the offer she was making. "I need to know what a financial power of attorney lets a family member do with a veteran's pension," he said, "and what it doesn't let them do, and how you find out which one is happening." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Tell me what you have," she said. He told her. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Give me 3 days." Shadow continued to come every night. He stopped trying to keep her in the mornings. It was clear she had somewhere she needed to be in the daylight hours, a circuit she was running that he did not yet fully understand. And he trusted the circuit because he trusted the dog. He started driving the 2-mile route between his property and Millbrook Road in the mornings to understand the path she was taking. And on the 3rd morning, he found the place where the circuit was not just Millbrook Road and his porch. She was stopping at Pineview. He watched from the road, parked far enough back not to be visible, and he watched Shadow sit at the perimeter of the Pineview property, at the fence line along the east side, closest to the memory care wing. And he watched her sit there for 40 minutes in the January cold with the motionless, absolute patience of an animal that has appointed itself to a post and will not leave it. She was keeping watch. He sat in the truck for a long time. The cold made the windows fog at the edges. He thought about Joe Ferris, who had listened more than he talked, and asked questions that showed he had been listening, and who was in a room in that building 60 yards from where his dog sat in the snow every morning, and who had not had a visitor in. How long? The receptionist's hesitation suggested it had been a long time. He thought about what it costs to be somewhere you cannot leave, with no one coming. He drove home and called Patricia. "I need you to move faster," he said. Patricia moved faster. What she found, working through the financial records that a veteran's legal advocacy filing could access in ways a private individual could not, was a pattern that had the specific clarity of something that has been done without expecting scrutiny. Derek Ferris had been directing his father's pension, the full $3,400 monthly, into a joint account that Derek controlled, since the power of attorney had been established in February of 2022. Pineview's billing for Joe's care, which was covered by VA benefits separately, was being paid correctly. Everything that should be paid was being paid. What was not happening was the remainder of the pension, 22 months of $3,400, which is $74,800, going anywhere that showed a traceable benefit to Joseph Ferris. Derek had not stolen it in a way that was simple to categorize. He had moved it through 2 accounts, made withdrawals in amounts below the automatic reporting threshold, and distributed the remainder into a business account in his own name for a landscaping company that had done no recorded work in Dalton County in the preceding fiscal year. It was not crude, but it was not complex enough, Patricia said, for someone who knew what they were looking for. "He's been doing this since the power of attorney," she said. "And Joe's in a memory care facility, which means Derek is gambling that his father either can't or won't be able to articulate what's happening well enough for anyone to take it seriously." Ethan looked at Shadow, who was on the kitchen floor looking at him with the amber patience of an animal that has been waiting for the human to arrive at the right conclusion and is now watching him get there. "Can we get him in to see Joe?" Ethan said. "I can," Patricia said. "A veteran's legal advocate has different standing than a private visitor. I can request a welfare check visit under VA oversight." "Do it," Ethan said. Today, Patricia saw Joe Ferris on a Thursday afternoon. She called Ethan after. Her voice had the specific quality it gets when she has been in a room with something that has cost her something, which Ethan recognized because he had a voice like that too. "He's not as diminished as the memory care placement suggests," she said. "His short-term memory has gaps. His long-term memory is intact. He knew who I was and why I was there within 5 minutes of me explaining it." A pause. "He's been asking for his dog for 6 months. The staff told him she'd been rehomed." Another pause. "He cried when I told him where she was going every night." Ethan put his hand on Shadow's back. The dog looked up at him. Her tail moved. "When can he see her?" Ethan said. "Saturday," Patricia said. "I've arranged a VA-supervised visit." "And Ethan," her voice shifted into its working register, "I'm filing the financial exploitation complaint with the County Adult Protective Services and the VA regional office today. The evidence is sufficient. This is going to move." It moved. The Adult Protective Services investigation opened on Monday. The VA regional office froze Derek's access to Joe's accounts on Wednesday, pending the investigation. Derek Ferris retained an attorney in Boise who told him, by all accounts, that the situation was not good. The county sheriff served a financial exploitation notice on Thursday. The investigation that followed over the next 10 weeks documented 22 months of unauthorized transfers totaling the $74,800 Patricia had calculated, plus an additional $12,000 in expenses run through the landscaping account against Joe's credit. Derek Ferris pleaded guilty in June to financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. was sentenced to 3 years, ordered to make full restitution, and prohibited from serving as power of attorney or financial agent for any protected adult for the remainder of his life. The judge, at sentencing, noted the duration of the exploitation and the specific vulnerability of the victim. A decorated veteran with cognitive impairment, isolated from his community and his companion, and described it as one of the most cynical betrayals of family trust she had encountered in 11 years on the bench. The Saturday visit happened before any of that. Ethan drove to Pine View with Shadow in the passenger seat, and Shadow sat the way she always sat, forward, attentive, systematic, but with something different underneath it. Something that was not quite stillness, an aliveness, a readiness, the specific quality of an animal that knows where it is going and why. The activity room at Pineview smelled like floor wax and the particular warmth of a building full of old people and old furniture, and the slow, contained life of a place where time moves differently than it does outside. Patricia was there. A VA oversight representative was there. A staff member who had agreed to supervise the visit was there. Joe Ferris was in a chair by the window. He had the bearing. Of course he had the bearing, it does not leave, but he was smaller than Ethan remembered, or time had redistributed the size of him, and his hands on the armrests had the careful stillness of hands that have learned to wait. He looked up when Ethan came through the door. He looked at Shadow. The dog crossed the room. She did not run. She did not jump. She moved with the deliberate, certain pace of an animal that knows this arrival is too important for anything except precision. And she went to Joe Ferris, and she put her head in his lap, and she was still. Joe Ferris put both hands in the thick fur along her neck. His eyes closed. He breathed. One long, full breath, the specific exhale of a man who has been holding something for a very long time and has been given, finally, the reason to put it down. Nobody in the room spoke. Ethan stood by the door. He had his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes on the window and the Idaho January beyond it, gray and cold and enormous. And he was doing the thing that men who have spent their lives being useful do in moments that do not require their usefulness. He was simply being present, which was what the moment asked, and which was enough. After a long while, Joe looked up. His eyes found Ethan across the room. "You kept her warm," he said. "She kept coming back," Ethan said. Joe looked down at Shadow. His hands moved slowly in her fur. "She would," he said. "That's what she does." He was quiet for a moment. "She's been doing that since the second deployment. She'd find whoever she needed to find." A pause. "She found you." Ethan didn't answer. There wasn't an answer that was as complete as the silence. By the following spring, Joe Ferris had been transferred, with Patricia's advocacy and the VA's involvement, to a veterans care facility 30 miles outside Dalton that had a program for residents with mild cognitive impairment, a porch that faced the mountains, and a policy on therapy animals that allowed Shadow to visit twice a week. Ethan drove her. On the first visit, Joe walked to the porch with his cane and a mug of coffee and sat in the chair that faced the mountains, and Shadow lay across his feet in the specific, boneless ease of an animal that has finally, completely, returned to where it belongs. Her right rear leg extended slightly, the joint that had ended her deployment, that carried the history of its repair in its architecture. Joe's hand rested on her back without moving, the way a hand rests when it has found what it was looking for and has no need to search anymore. Ethan sat in the other chair. They drank their coffee and looked at the mountains and did not talk much, because most of what needed to be said had already been said by a dog who had walked 2 miles through Idaho winter for 3 weeks before anyone understood what she was trying to tell them. She picked the right porch, Joe said eventually. She usually does, Ethan said. Shadow's tail moved once against the porch boards, slow, certain. The sound of it was small in the mountain quiet, the specific, final sound of a story that has arrived, at last, exactly where it was always going. Sometimes miracles don't come as lightning. Sometimes they come as a scratch at the base of a door at 2 a.m, patient and persistent, asking nothing except that someone open it. Joe Ferris had survived 2 tours in Vietnam and 40 years of an ordinary life, built on the foundation of extraordinary service. And when the world narrowed down to a room in a care facility and a son who had decided his father's life was a resource to be managed, the thing that refused to let it end that way was a 60-pound German Shepherd walking through January in Idaho. Because she had been trained to find people, and because the person she needed to find was not her handler. It was the man her handler trusted. God does not always send rescue in the forms we recognize. Sometimes he sends it on 4 legs, with ice in her fur and raw paws and more faithfulness than most people manage in a lifetime. The heroes in this story are many. Patricia, who moved fast. The VA oversight officer, who listened. The staff member at Pineview, who hesitated before giving the policy answer, because she had a conscience and it was still working. But the one who started it, who kept showing up when she had no reason to believe anyone was paying attention, was Shadow. Loyalty does not ask for a guarantee. It shows up. Every night. In the cold, and it trusts that eventually, somewhere, someone will open the door. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the ones we love will move heaven and earth, or 2 miles of Idaho winter, to find their way back to us. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you have ever had an animal that knew something before you did, we want to hear that story. Your story might be what someone else needs to read tonight. If you believe in loyalty, in service, in the faithfulness that finds people when institutions fail them, subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next story. May God bless you, protect your family, and keep you faithful to the people and animals who have placed their trust in you. You are needed more than you know.